Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Cray and I'm chatting with TV and film editor Eoin McGuirk, fresh off his role editing Miss Scarlet and The Duke. Thank you so much for chatting with us. It's great to get the perspective of an editor, because I think if you don't know editing, people are very surprised. It's so creative. Like, it's very technical, but it's so deeply creative. And you can essentially, if in certain types of projects, like, you're telling the story in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, I in terms of what people think of it is from the outside, well, it's always amazing to me that even people within the film industry or within the TV industry don't really know what happens in the cutting room. And there are sort of good reasons for that. Because obviously you're right, we have a huge part to play in how the story is told. You know, a very, very important part to play in it, but also I suppose we kind of sit a little bit on judgment on everybody else's hard work, and there's good reasons that they don't, like, usually in admiration of it, sometimes not, and there's good reasons why a lot of what goes on in the cutting room just stays here. And it's funny, it's like, even when I've worked in cutting rooms when we've been right beside the set, we get very few visitors, and it's like, even you almost never see an actor, say, in the cutting room, and there are very, very good reasons for that too, because it just couldn't help them, you know, seeing themselves halfway through a show or whatever. So there's an awful lot of secrecy that surrounds the cutting room, and so this feels a little odd for me doing an interview, because usually I have to be very discreet, and, you know, usually if anybody asks me how things are going, everything's wonderful and everybody's great, and
we won't go into specifics, but like, strokes, like, because I think we've all sort of been there, but I also think it's helpful for maybe people to know what can go wrong and what to avoid.
Sure.
You know, like, what are common mistakes people do, because I mean, you're someone who started off, was Gridlock a film-based short, or like?
Oh yeah. Oh well, I'd been in cutting rooms for a very long
Very
time
long
when I
time.
did Gridlock.
Yeah.
Who was that for? It was, well, obviously it was Ian Hunt Duffy's the director, and Derek. Actually, it was through Narian Van Mela, I think, that I got that. Who's the DOP on it, because I'd cut other things that Narian had shot, and he liked the way I cut his shots. So, you know, I like the way he shot things. So that was a very kind of profitable arrangement for the both of us, I think, for a while. But God, that's what, is that about 8 years ago? So, or maybe not so long, actually. But that was great. Yeah, I'd been working obviously in cutting rooms for, I don't know, a long time by the time that came along. But that's an interesting one for anyone who doesn't know, in that it's a mystery short. It obviously, in terms of Irish shorts, it won, I don't know if it won 100 awards around the world, but it certainly won north of 70 or 80. So it was very successful. It had a long run in festivals and that, and it was a fun one to cut, because just basically the premise, such as it was that it's a traffic jam on a country road, and there's a father and a daughter, and he's agitated, and he gets out to see what's causing the traffic jam. When he gets back, his daughter is missing, and it's a kind of whodunit. There's a cast of characters all start getting out of their cars, everybody starts accusing each other, and and there's a great twist ending, you know, after we've exhausted. Oh, well, you've seen it, I take it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was really fun to watch that with an audience. I think the first time we watched it was at Galway, but I got to see it a few times in a cinema with a packed cinema, and it was always that thing. As soon as the girl goes missing, you could feel just the story get its hooks into the audience, and it was always that thing at the end. You would see people whispering and, you know, just trying to say, "Oh, did you get it?" Well, and then try and discussing the ending. So it was one that was it was a lot of fun to do. But actually, in terms of the editing, if you're talking about how important the editing was for that, well, Well, there were certain script changes that I think there was a lot more setup in the script, and the script was brilliant. So a lot of it is very faithful to the script. I mean, that was one of those ones you read the script, you go, "Oh, this will work." And I should say, when I got the script, I handed it to my wife, and I think I was doing something in the garden, and I was watching her through the window, and I knew what page she was on depending on the look on her face. Do you know,
That's
like,
very
and
sharp writing
you
as
know,
well.
well, these are things I trust. My wife has nothing to do with the film industry, so trust her. Um, I trust her opinion hugely because it's untainted by any kind of, if you're a professional, you have a different way of looking at things, and sometimes that can blind you to what's really important. But I knew when she loved it, I was like, oh well, I'll definitely do this, because I usually, if I'm doing shorts, I have to clear up my wife, because it's well, do you know the way the problem with shorts are, you don't pay, so you do it when you can, and when you can is the weekends, and it's late at night, and it means you not being around for a while. So
Mm.
yeah, so I tend to, I mean, I had a thing of never doing more than one a year, because but anyway, but so that was my whole thing about doing shorts, and I would totally recommend anybody going intending to do them, because they're a great way of testing yourself. But yeah,
And make
I
sure
think
to clear it with the big boss.
yeah, well, quite, yeah,
But you're
yeah.
dead
Well,
right.
well,
Yeah.
absolutely. No, but you've only so much. I know in the past, I've definitely spread myself too thin that way. So, um, but in terms of Gridlock specifically, in terms of the big thing, I think, without wanting to give away the ending, the big thing that we had to do, or that I saw as the editor's job, and that obviously there was a pacing job involved, which I think worked really well. But what I was most pleased with was disguising who the actual killer was, or the actual, not killer, but the villain of the piece was, while at the same time giving you enough hints that at the end, when it's revealed, you go, oh, of course. Because the problem was, initially, in initial cuts of it, it was very obvious who it was right from the start. It was a little bit of a Shining situation, where it was like, oh, that person's crazy. Do you know the way? So I'm pretty pleased that I'm pretty confident that worked anyway. So that was
And that it
yeah,
holds
that
up.
was
But
the job on that.
because I think it's very interesting, like the scope of the type of things that you work on. So you have like done what is like a kind of like a, but I mean, very celebrated Irish short, very skillfully done, but like a local short to working
Mhm.
on like the kin, which is like a huge big international operation, and it's something that's traveling very, very further afield. What are the kind of similarities and differences? Like, how do you mentally prepare for a project of that scope?
Something like Ken. Well, I often view. I was delighted to get to do. So I'm doing 2 episodes on the new season, which are directed by Kate Dolan. So I was
Oh,
very pleased
brilliant.
to get to work with her, because I loved Catcall. I mean, I really liked the
Yeah.
movie as well. You're Not My Mother, but I really loved Catcalls. I have a weakness. I suppose, like a lot of editors, I have a weakness for cat people type stories, because obviously, there are certain editing techniques that are really associated with cat people, the original Val Lewton movie,
Yeah.
and so yeah, and I love that short. So working with the prospect of working with her was great. But what I should say about Kane, I suppose, is that I've done about a month's uncredited work on the first series. It's just always nice to get asked back. That's they don't ask you back if it didn't go well. Like, so I really enjoyed working on the first series. And one of the things that was really good about it, I think, Peter and everyone behind it, and Emma Fleischer, so Peter McKenna is the showrunner, they're very clear-eyed about what the strengths and weaknesses of the show. And I was very confident from talking to them that they knew how to make the show better. And I'm really hoping that, yeah, can't wait till people see the new series. But in terms of, like, does it make you nervous or anything? No, I mean, you just always kind of, I don't know, I'm always kind of keen to show people what I can do.
Yeah.
I'm pretty, I'm not new to this. I suppose I've been in like the room I'm sitting in now in screen scene is directly underneath the first drama cutting room that I worked in, which was about 20 years ago on Bachelor's Walk. So I don't get nervous as such. This is far more nerve wracking for me than anything I would do in work.
Oh
It's
no.
well, this is new to me, talking to people about editing, and but you well know. I suppose I talk to my assistants about editing, or when I was an assistant, I talked to the editors. It was an everyday thing, so it is something that sort of yeah, it's a topic of conversation for me all the time. But yeah, in terms of looking forward to Kane, I suppose really you just read the scripts. I'm not an editor that ignores the scripts. I know some people seem to think that it's all about whatever they shoot. I really don't agree with that. I think the more familiar you are with the script, the more you can gauge what kind of a job it's going to be, whether you're going to need to restructure things, whether it's just going to work. Like what it kind of tells you what you're going to be spending your time doing. Because if you have a script that absolutely works, you're just going to be making a good thing better. If you have a script that you start to, you do have to watch. Sometimes you read a script in quite with a professional eye where you're kind of kicking the wheels of it going, because if there are problems as the editor, they're going to be your problems eventually. There's nobody else is going to solve those things if they're already there, particularly if it's a structural thing, or if you think the storytelling's unclear, that is going to be your job to sort that out. So certainly in terms of preparing for again, I read the scripts, I talked to Kate, and I was pretty confident it was not going to be terribly hard for me in the best way possible. It was like, and that's how it transpired. I've got to say that was it was a pretty in a good way, an easy gig for me, in that the scripts were already good. Kate's a good director. She it was her first time doing TV, but it was her first time
And
using
that's
two
a big
cameras.
gig. Like, I mean, she's so talented
Oh
and
yeah,
so celebrated. And oh my God, her feature is brilliant. Like, I love
yeah. Oh well, it wasn't. Yeah, well, I wasn't like surprised at how quickly
it.
she took to it, but it should like just in a practical way, yeah, that she hadn't used a two camera setup before. And I've been in cutting rooms on shows where very celebrated directors can't use two cameras, or just like they put the second one on a long lens out of sight, and it just sort of it's just there. Where she knew how to, I think she knew pretty well how to maximize the two camera setup, which is often how a lot of like TV is shot, just because of you're on a schedule and they've got 6 other episodes to make, and yeah, she took to all that really well. So it was it was nice. Yeah.
Just the practicalities of doing that, because I presume, like, okay, you're in a project, you get to decide the kind of the flow of the project, how
Mm.
how things will look and feel, and that's up to you. Is there, when plugging into like a big system like that and being like one section of a big system working under Kate, how do you ensure, is there a house style, is there specific pacing, like how do you ensure that all the episodes feel the same? Because it's just, like that you're part of one big ecosystem. Like, is that something that, people come in and like producers and showrunners come in and sit with you and actually go, we normally do it this way? Or is it something that you're given on a sheet beforehand? Is it something you play by
No,
ear? Like,
I've never been
no
handed a
star
sheet. No.
wipes, only star wipes?
Yeah, people frown on Star Wipes. It's a real shame. I never get to. I always try and slip one in, but yeah, they always take it out. No, what I would say in terms of the obvious thing that has changed over the last, say, 20 years was when I started. So a lot of, my first drama jobs were here in Dublin. I then moved to London and assisted there. And basically the British model at the time was very director led. So you would have different script writers and different directors from block to block, and you would see real variations of style from episode to episode. Now that can be fun, and it was fun to work on, but I think obviously viewers' expectations have gone away from that. and then that people want a consistent show and characters to be consistent from one week to the next. And certainly the more episodic style that I was used to saying the noughties didn't lend itself to that. And I should say at the time, it wasn't like people behind the scenes weren't aware of this. The Sopranos and The Wire had come along and people were looking at them in Britain like with astonishment, going, "Oh my God, look at this! It's a big story they're telling as opposed to just a week to week thing." So what has changed in that, if you're talking about who keeps an eye on making sure that the show is consistent, that I suppose it's the position of the unofficial position of the showrunner, because you never see the word, there's no credit that says showrunner on any show I've ever seen anyway. But there are people who are tasked with that, and it's usually the creator stroke head writer. And I really like it as a way of doing things, although it does take power away from the director. So it's a little strange that way. It's certainly Kate had to get used to that, and it's a little strange for me because, as the editor, I would think my primary relationship is with the director. So the director has to trust the editor, or else it doesn't matter how good you are. If the director doesn't trust you, they're going to need to get someone else that they do trust. So, but it's a funny one for you, because I always think of, while the director is on the show, I always think of myself as directly answerable to them. And I always check things with them first before saying anything else. So anything they do, nothing goes out of the cutting room without the director's say so. So what happens with the showrunner kind of model is, at a certain point, the director drifts away and the showrunner takes over. And so then it is a little odd for the editor, because your loyalties shift. You're loyal to the director until they're not there anymore. And then, but I suppose the thing is, the way I see it, or the way I explain it to myself, or the way I explain it to directors, is ultimately my primary loyalty is to the show itself and to make sure the show is as good as possible. And I suppose if everybody's got that in mind, then it'll be okay. But it is, it creates a slight split loyalties thing for the editor. But until the day that the showrunner takes over, I consider myself essentially to be working primarily for the director, I suppose. But does that, I can't remember what the question was.
Yeah, no, I'm just kind of getting mad. I was like, that's amazing. It was kind of like more like, what are the practicalities as like being like kind of tagged into a team like that? But
well, in terms of a team of editors,
and going like, like if someone's like, like, like now Star Wipes is the house style, so you can only do it, like, I think all my questions will be in terms of Star Wipes. Like, it's just, this is our house style now, we want to do this. Or actually, what if someone changes in episode 2, actually we've changed that arc ever so slightly, like now you have to change all these things like later in the edit. Is there any of this, or is it just like you're very much so isolated dealing with Kate, and then maybe changes come on at a later time? Like
well, I would talk to the other editors, not hugely, just in terms of, you sort of compare notes. I mean, obvious things are to do with, say, temp music, like you keep the temp, you'll usually, most shows you'll work from previous series, you'll get an idea of what, because if you're talking about feel of show, like obviously how it looks is baked into, in terms of how it looks, the DOPs are told that, and the production designers, art department, they all know that costume, makeup, they all know that already. So it's going to be consistent, and particularly with I think, again, with the showrunner model, that stuff is all baked in terms of how the story is told.
But it's the pacing, like 3 seconds of a frame or something can make the difference between like someone being good and someone being evil, and like something being very like taking your time over something, and then something being squished into a montage, like it changes the feel of it like massively, and they're big choices and decisions that can change a character's presence, like.
But I suppose what I would say is that in terms of stuff like that, in terms of, if you're talking basically about what is the right way to edit something, I suppose how I would explain it is that when you're starting out, it seems like there is a million possibilities in terms of how to cut a performance or how to show the geography and how to make sure that everything's clear in that. And actually, as you get more experienced, it becomes just one voice that you start to trust. You go, oh, that's I know what to do here. In terms of I don't think I ever get told how to cut things, like, because I don't really think that editing. Yeah, people think, like you were when you were introducing it, you think of it in a technological way because there's all this hardware involved. But once you get the hang of all that, it's actually an emotional thing. It's not even really about aesthetics or continuity or any of the things, or it's actually about knowing what the emotional thread is in a scene and in a performance, and how to accentuate it or pull it back in a way that's right for the story. So I suppose you're always sort of subservient to what's the best way to tell the story. And that, I suppose, there's no style of editing as such, like, as in, well, obviously there's certain ways of cutting certain kinds of moments, whether comedy moments or action moments or musical moments, whatever. But most shows will have all those things within them anyway. If it's got a broad range of I don't know, different kinds of scenes and different kinds of moments, you'll have to employ things that are kind of horror moments or comedy moments in all sorts of genres, whether it's kin or anything like. And so you have to have those things in your toolbox, and you have to know how to achieve certain kind of emotional effects. But yeah, I don't know. I'm always a bit nervous of the word style with editing, because a style to me sounds like something you would impose on the material, and I don't. I don't know how to say this without saying I have no style. So no, I don't have a specific editing style, I suppose. I just have things I know how to do and know how to achieve, and you kind of use those tools at the right moments, I suppose. So it's more a kind of interpretive thing rather than imposing a style. So I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously comedies are cut slightly different from kitchen sink dramas, or there are different ways things can be cut, but you sort of have to know how to do it all. I can't imagine just concentrating on one thing, or being told how to cut in one way. It's
So if someone was like to go in and go this, it would be micromanaging, and they're therefore uncouth because you're like, I know what I'm
well,
doing.
here, listen,
You know?
sometimes they have to tell. If you've got it totally wrong, you can't be precious about it. No more than an actor might get a performance just slight a line wrong, and maybe the director will have to say, listen, they've tried to tell you it 10 different ways, but you're just going to have to say it this way. And sometimes that can happen to editors. You are interpreting the script, just and the actors' performances and all the camera work and everything, just like everybody else is. And sometimes you're gonna see it differently from the director. Now they might think, oh well, that's better than I had thought it would be, and sometimes they won't, and they'll tell you. So you just go, all right, well, I'll fix it. So I mean, you definitely can't. You certainly, I think, as an editor, because you're not the boss. I've never worked on anything where the editor has final cut, so you definitely have to kind of cheerfully admit when you're wrong, or when if somebody wants something done differently. I think you'd be foolish not to try it, because you don't know that something won't work better than your idea, even if you were sure that your version of this scene was the best possible version. You're probably wrong. There's always a better way to do it. I always find whenever you go back to things again and look at it fresh, like, there's always new ways to improve things. So yeah. I suppose the question was a little bit about style. Yeah, I don't have an editing style, so I'm not sure what I would do if someone told me to apply my style to something. I just know what I bring to certain situations, or how I sort of deal with certain problems, or yeah, I don't know. sort of thing.
So do you find as well, like some of it is like managing expectations and people politics, where you're like when you were saying that about the actor, I was sort of laughing because one of my friends was an actor, and I remember she was like, I had cut like a test scene for her because I'm not an editor. I just
Sure.
took a film-based course, and I
Yeah.
was like one finger editing, like an 80-year-old trying to type on a keyboard. But it's like not all 80-year-olds, there's many technical capability 80-year-olds, but it's like that thing where she was watching herself and she was cringing, and I was like, go away and I'll show you the end of it. And then
Oh,
at the end of it she was fine, like she was
oh
like, oh,
yeah.
it's like it's every moment she's like, oh,
Well,
it was
there you go. Now you know. Yeah, that's exactly it. Why would they put themselves through that to see you do that? But you would have seen how you can. I mean, the extent to which you can manipulate a performance is quite. You know, it's a pretty powerful tool, editing, in terms of how it affects the performance. I mean, you can improve a performance. You can certainly ruin a performance by the way you cut it, and you have to. I suppose as an editor, in terms of how I deal with actors, well, you have to be. I mean, you have to sort of be very respectful of what they've done, because I would think acting is a far braver thing to do in than editing. I'm not put. Nobody ever sees me. I'm hidden away in a room. I don't have to perform. I rarely have to
except for
perform in
now.
front of.
You have
Except
to
now,
talk to
yeah,
us.
this is nerve wracking. Editing's easy. Yeah. Well, so that, yeah, you have to be very conscious that you have to be respectful of what they've done, but you can do an awful lot to, like, say, if you have younger actors or inexperienced actors, because you'll have in any show actors of varying abilities, or ones who are theatrical actors who can just reel off reams of pages of dialogue all perfectly, and other people who can only do it like a line at a time, and you need to know what strategies to employ to be able to sensitively, highlight one of the, or maybe help them where they might need help. Um, but sorry, you were saying in terms of the managing of
Managing
expectations.
of expectations, and I presume that means like, like I can't speak to this, and I'm definitely not looking for any specifics because I'm sure NDAs have been signed left, right, and center. But even like a power struggle between a director and a producer, or like that kind of clash of opinions in a room where maybe people don't agree that they're both so invested on it. Like, do you as the editor go, I'll try it both ways, or I'm not getting involved?
Oh,
Like,
well, I would always be, my first instinct would always be to try it. That the best way to diffuse anything like that is to try it, and to try it sincerely, to absolutely try to make whatever the suggestion is work. Now, because that way, I mean, who knows, that the suggestion that you and the director, or the director, thought was horrible may, once you try it, turn out to be better, or you might find a different third way that sort of, actually, because most notes in terms of those kind of power struggles, usually all it is you're usually dealing with somebody who wants the thing that you're working on to be better.
yeah. Then like, okay, so they're very different structures. So the short film, and that you'd be doing kind of like in dribs and drabs, and then I presume the kin is you are block booked for a set period of time,
Yeah.
and that is your focus. Then something like the Lobster, I'm just wondering, like with regards to project work, like when are you brought on board with that?
Oh, well, the Lobster was, yeah. So that was, I don't know if that was my last job as an assistant, but it was one of my last jobs as an assistant, and it was one of those things where I wasn't the first choice as the first assistant, so but I got sent the script, and obviously I'd seen Dogtooth, and
You're like,
but when I read the
what
Lobster, I thought,
is
well,
this?
it was one of those, how many times am I gonna get to work on a science fiction film about people being turned into animals if they fail to find a mate. I was like, well, I've got to do this, and I was really curious about Yorgos Lanthimos, and that because I lived in Greece for a while, and well, I can't speak Greek anymore. I used to be able to understand, and I was very curious about the actors' performances in Dogtooth, and wondered how that would translate into English, and it was it was that kind of deadpan, weird staccato delivery, sort of drained of emotion. So I was very curious, and I was very curious about, like, clearly he had this very um incredible sense of framing and of the way he placed things in the frame. So I was really keen to do it, but I knew I wasn't first choice, and then I think the first assistant dropped out quite late, so this was like, I don't know, 10 days before they were due to start shooting down in Park Nasilla. We start, and so yeah, I just said yes immediately, and then it was actually, that was a little bit of a shame on them, that when they got in contact with me, the plan was still to shoot on 35, and I had worked in Technicolor, and I suppose I had quite a knowledge of how film worked, which is getting rarer and rarer all the time. Obviously, that knowledge is aging out, because anybody coming in the last like 10-15 years is not going to know anything about that, or very little. So I was really keen to use that bit of my brain, because it was something that I got to do very rarely, or increasingly rarely even by then. And so, but then it became very apparent that we couldn't really shoot in Kerry and send the rushes to London and get them back in the kind of turnaround that was needed. So there was a very late decision made to shoot it digitally. But yeah, so that was a little bit of a shame. But in terms of the shoot of the Lobster, it was it was fantastic fun. I mean, the cutting rooms were in Park Nasilla, in the hotel that's in the movie. So all the actors were staying there. So I'd be hanging out my washing in the morning and John C. Reilly would cycle past and go, "Hi, John," and or you'd be having a cigarette outside, and Olivia Colman would be there, and yeah, that was great. So it was a lot of fun, and it was but it was also just, I found it fascinating. I found how he approached things fascinating, Yorgos Lanthimos. And I remember every day when I would kind of go down to a set to split the rushes at lunchtime, I'd get the cards from the DIT and head back up on my hard drive back to the cutting room. And yeah, it was always just fun to see what they had shot that day. And yeah, it was really just, yeah, it was, I wouldn't, in terms of, I just remember I couldn't wait to get started. It was definitely, it was a feeling of excitement, like in terms of how do I prepare for that. Well, I mean, usually you're just answering a load of questions, and at the time, yeah, it would have been how, there's a lot of practical concerns about how you're going to back everything up. And even though it had this very stellar cast, behind the scenes, the Lobster, it wasn't vast amounts of money. So it was like, well, how do we do this relatively cheaply? But yeah, and it was, yeah, but it was a lot of fun to work on.
Brilliant. And just with terms of, I'm just curious to how a project like that works. So you're on set, you're putting together scenes straight away after they're cut, which is kind of very, yeah. And then do a rough cut, send it away, wait for a while. Does it come back, like, or is it all so quick?
Well, that was a slightly unusual one in that so yes, there was another Yorgos, the editor, Blackfish, who's fantastic, who I was assisting. So he would, I would prep up all the rushes, and he would cut and try and keep up with camera, and prepare a cut as we were going. And occasionally Yorgos Lanthimos would come in and see what we had done, and it was so you're cutting while they're shooting, for loads of reasons. Just, like, obviously that's generally how you do it with features and with drama, because if something's not worked, they need to know while they still have the actors, while they still have the location. And so you're doing a version as you go. Now the initial version of the Lobster was unusual, I think, partly as a a result of the way that Yorgos Lanthimos shot things, in that that initial cut of that was done on set was like 3.5 hours long. I don't know what the final movie was, but it was about half that in the end. So he had a quite unusual way of working, in that he would just let things play out. And so instead of, and because there's not a huge amount of cutting within the scenes, what he would do when he needed to get the length down is he would just remove scenes, or cut them in half. So there was a lot in the script that didn't make it into the final film. So it was interesting to see that happen. In terms of what happened after the shoot, unfortunately, I couldn't. What happened specifically was Blackfish, the editor, and Yorgos Lanthimos went off to a Greek island where nobody could get to them. I think it was only reachable by boat, and they hid themselves away for the summer, and they just cut, because I think Yorgos Lanthimos has a huge amount of control over his. I don't think he has. He may have final cut over. It was definitely. He was, in a large way. It was funny to see a director with the amount of power that he had. So they went off, did that, and then they went back to London to finish it. Now, I wasn't able to, I'd moved on to another job, so I wasn't able to go over to London to finish it. So I sort of nominated a friend of mine from London, to another Irish assistant in London, to Connor, to take my place. But yeah, I would have loved to have seen it all the way through. I mean, I did stay somewhat involved right to the end, but my main part of it was the shoot. But yeah, it was just, it's always fascinating to see different ways of telling stories, and that was such a idiosyncratic story. I mean, it was funny, actually. One of the things that was funny was during the shoot, I remember a lot of the crew were initially a little bewildered by what is this thing. And I remember one of the ADs, as I was walking back from the hotel back to the stables, the kind of stables where the cutting room was, with my drives, one of the ADs shouting at me, "It's a comedy." And I was like, "Oh yeah, yes, it is." And she was like, "I've only just got that. This is really funny." But because it was so weird, that I think it just threw a lot of people initially. But it was funny to see people come around to it and get really into it, and it was just
That's hilarious.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
so
It's a
that's like
comedy.
you've a big kind of scope, and you've worked on so many kind of different styles of projects. What are your favorite jobs to get? Is there anything that you'd love to try out that you haven't already?
Oh, um, God. I don't know in terms of picking favorites, because yeah, I mean, this almost, I can only really think of one job I didn't enjoy. And so, like, I generally just feel very lucky because I've always been freelance. So every job you get feels like a break, and you're always very happy to start and get going. And so I don't have favorites in that way. In terms of things that I haven't had to do that I'd love to do, um, I always think of musicals. I love musicals, and I've never. There are very few of them get made in Ireland. I mean, I got to do. I got to cut the action scenes into the Badlands, which was an AMC show with kung fu. It was a kind of kung fu science fiction show, and I got to, on the second and third series, I was one of the fight editors. That felt a little bit like a musical, in that it was very rhythmic, and you didn't really have to worry about continuity. It was just all about impact and movement, and just, well, I suppose because martial arts is, I think, in its original thing, was like Peking opera or something. So there is a connection to sort of musical theater that way, and it does have. There's all. You're watching the way people move their arms and legs, and do they extend properly. So it's a little bit like Strictly Come Dancing, just they keep on kicking each other in the head. But so that was the nearest I've got to do that. I suppose, actually, funny, that would probably be the nearest I've got to do to doing science fiction, which, given that the first movie I ever saw in the cinema was Star Wars, and I did, I suppose, not that you're you know, I love lots of different types of films and stories, but you know, the things I loved as a kid were primarily science fiction films and then kind of monster movies, you know. And they were my initial love. And I don't. Oh, well, I got to be the assistant on Grabbers, which kind of ticked two of those boxes. But I'd love to cut one of those things myself. But although we, so yes, I suppose those are things that I would like to do that I haven't done yet. But I kind of always feel like I don't know. Generally, it's not primarily the genre. It's always the thing of if the script is good, it doesn't really matter what the genre is. You just really that's really exciting. Like like I did last year, a thing called Maxine for
Way,
with the
yeah.
director Laura Way. Yeah, and I loved working with her, and yeah, and I thought the scripts for that were fascinating. Now it received a relatively mixed response, but I'm curious to see how it. I think it's going to be on Netflix later this year, so I'm curious to see what people think of it. But I think some of the response to that was maybe more to do with the subject matter uh, than the thing itself, because yeah, that was one where I wouldn't have necessarily picked it beforehand if you just if you I'd never thought about working in a true crime genre as such, but I remember reading those scripts and going, oh well, I find this interesting about the sorry, just for it's obviously about the Sow murders and about Maxine Carr and Ian Huntley, and I just when I read the scripts is oh, these are two liars lying to each other, themselves, and everybody around them. And I mean, I know that it's real subject matter, so you have to be sensitive to that, but just as subject matter for drama, people who can't tell the truth are always interesting. So I that was
Also,
fascinating
I
to me.
think unlikable women do tend to really polarize people. Like, you know, like unlikable men in
Yeah,
like
yeah,
not in that same way. Like they really challenge a viewer in a way that a man doesn't. And I think it's sort of the way we've been conditioned. Like you know, like that's gonna upset people more. And men and women probably alike. And I wonder, like, is it the internalized misogyny? Is it just we've been inherently told, you know, like femininity is gentle and honest? You know, like, is there some unconscious, there's some
yeah, yeah.
unconscious thing there that it, I don't know, but
Sure, sure. Well, there is a huge amount of that that goes on. Just so in terms of if you specifically, if you're talking about the reaction to Maxine Carr, yeah, possibly because it was that the reaction, whatever bad reaction it had, seemed to be broadly one of two things. Was one that we were trying to see her as a victim, which I don't think the
yeah.
final show did. And then other people thought that we were endangering her in some way, which I don't think that's true either. But in terms of her character, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is always that thing with her in that she is lumped in with Rose West and Myra Hindley, and they actively, and all of the three of these women had psychopathic partners. I mean, but yeah, it's funny that the men involved seem to be, you're right, not as don't catch the public imagination in the same way that those three women did. And that's not to exonerate her in any way, but it is. Yeah, I do think that that's part of it. I would say, just actually, funnily enough, just in terms of people's response to any kind of films and TV shows, is that ones that are created for women, I always find whenever you're working on one on a genre that's aimed at women, you sort of know it's going to be quite badly
Yeah.
reviewed. Like it's always, like if you think of, you know, like even if you think in terms of literature that what's the phrase, chick lit, like it's so dismissive. And whenever you're working on something that's aimed at women, and if it's glossy, like these things are always pejorative, like as if something that looks glossy, well, why wouldn't you want something that looks glossy? That's nice to look at. Like, so that's like, if you think romantic comedies are always, they always seem to be docked at least a star. Like I love romantic comedies, like But and I know often these
Yeah,
things
but
are
it's women's
really hard
authors
to
as well.
do.
It's women musicians. If you look at like women's voices aren't heard on the radio as much, like women academic, like it's very funny. It is just, I think unconsciously society doesn't necessarily love listening to women's voices. So like that's why, you know, like this thing of equality on panels, like people really have to strive for it, because you're like, oh, and someone was saying actually if it's statistically deeply unlikely, if you were to pick, just say, like a number at random, say from academics or experts in a field, that you would get so few women on panels. Like if you were to go, okay, well, like, look, there's like this amount of even like male dominated areas or academics or something like that, you actually, it's unlikely to get all, like statistically, you would be unlikely if you just picked a cross section of panelists from that pool, you'd be unlikely to get it. And it's in, and like, I mean, people are aware of it now, so it's starting to change. But I think like that, what you're saying in art forms and the way people perceive it, it's still slower to be filtered down. Like people are taking action, but it's not fully there. I think it's like people are starting to open up and listen to those different voices, but they're still not fully heard and deemed to be not mainstream when it's 50% of the population.
Well, it's yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just, oh, well, I tell you one thing that I always think is funny is just say, in terms of like, because my job essentially, actually, if you get right down to it, is to manipulate the audience into an emotional response. Now, there are all sorts of emotional responses that critics and, or that are broadly taught to be absolutely fine. Like if you disgust people or depress them or appall them or shock them, these are all laudable things. But if you make someone cry, that this is somehow tawdry and cheap. And this to me seems a world totally on its head, in that to make someone cry, wow, that's hard to do. They need to be really invested. But obviously, I would have thought, well, in some ways that has to do with, I suppose, notions of masculinity and what it's okay for men to feel or think or express. Those things, maybe crying is still embarrassing, but being tough enough to be able to withstand gory violence in a gangster movie, well, that's far easier to get on board with. But yeah, I still have to, I still want to be part of something that makes people cry. I'd like to
Yeah,
work
I
as a
love
tearjerker.
that. But also I think sincerity is a real no as well. Like,
Uh,
like
oh yeah.
sincerity, like, like emotionally earnest people, like simple stories. I think like a lot of they get critically panned. And like sometimes they are just terrible. Like sometimes they are just like base level. Like sometimes they're really funny and complex and but I think people don't like to watch that sincerity. I think they find it really uncomfortable, like or mainstream or something as well. If you like, there was something that I was watching and it was, like a small town pulls together and achieve a goal against the odds, and I was like, actually it's quite good. Like the characters were well rendered, like it was very sweet. You knew from the second you sit down where it's going, and it's like the
Sure.
underdog film, and this particular underdog film was like it's well made, it's well shot, it's well put together. Again, the characters are kind of nice and rich and mixed. Like it's not reinventing the wheel in terms of film structure. It's not an
Yeah.
avant-garde anything. It's not challenging, but it's a really satisfying watch, and it's well executed, panned like by critics, but
Yeah.
loved by
Oh,
people.
right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I tend to I suppose as I get older, I trust things that connect with people more than I do reviews at this stage. I think, I mean, I remember actually when I worked in Soho, the Soho, oh God, it's on Darley Street, where all the film reviewers go. They go down into these dark screening rooms in the middle of the day, and I remember going, oh, that's it. And I remember I was in the projection room. I can't remember it actually was Mark Commode was in there watching. It was that vampire hunter movie. Abraham Lincoln Vampire. It was something
So, but
bad. It
it
was
was
something quite
it
bad.
was
Well,
like
I think it was great.
consciously
But I
bad.
remember thinking, that's a terror. That's a terrible way to watch a movie. And I always thought, well, like, what an awful way to watch a comedy where so much of the enjoyment, actually, comedies and horrors, I always think are quite badly reviewed. Whereas if they watched them with an audience and could hear people
And get
screaming and
them two
laughing,
glasses of
that would
wine
be
before the
very different.
screening as well. Do you know? Let them bring their mate from down the pub
Sure.
who'll be sitting beside them chuckling the whole time. You know, like that's what you want instead of someone going like academic. Like, I mean, it's about the emotional, like it is about eliciting the emotion of laughter, of like happiness, of joy, of fear.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of them. And like it's when it's a communal experience, it's so like that's why people go to the cinema and don't just home.
Well, quite to go back to the first thing that you brought up was gridlock. And yeah, I mean, for me, the absolute joy that I knew right from when I first saw the script was like, oh, I'd love to watch this with an audience. So always that was the goal was I always had that as the end point is, oh, one day we'll get to sit in a packed cinema and watch this with other people and feel that reaction to it. And it worked pretty much exactly as it was planned. And that feeling, I suppose, actually, if I were to go back to like how I ever ended up in films in the first place, like I have that time my dad brought me to Star Wars when I was 4, I remember almost none of it, but I do remember being in a dark room full of people and just that sense of anticipation and excitement. And that, yeah, I don't know, that's really kind of the best part of it for me. And that, I suppose, to be, and yeah, that's something that unfortunately, like with TV, you never unfortunately get that feeling because it connects with people in their
And on
homes in a
Twitter, you
different
can make
way.
some
But
sarcastic, really short jokes on like or Mastodon now, like, and that's it.
oh, well, I do remember when Twitter first came along, I was working as an assistant on Misfits. It was a show on
I
E4
love
about, kid. It
Misfit.
had
What is
Robert
it? What is
Sheen
it?
in
Next
it.
Moon with
Oh, did
Aspos.
you?
Like I'll always
It
remember
was,
that tagline. It's such a good
yeah, yeah,
show.
exactly. Oh, you've
Yeah.
described it
I
better
know
than I ever
that was
could.
the
Oh yeah,
tagline
I
of it.
worked.
Like I'd love to claim.
Oh, was it? Oh, we didn't know that in the cutting room. Yeah, I think I worked on all 5 series of that in some capacity. But it was such, particularly the first couple of series when it went out, watching its kind of target audience, like which is English teenagers or British teenagers reacting to it was hilarious and tweeting back all the funny lines in it, and instantly it having a life outside was really exciting. So I remember that was, I think yeah, I remember, I think on the second series I think I might have been on Grabber, so I was in Belfast while it was going out on E4 and just watching Twitter and watching people's reaction to it. Of course, watching Twitter, while something you've worked really really hard on, watching the Twitter reaction to it, that could be a double-edged sword. It's not always so kind.
I had a really nice uplifting bit. I was like, "Oh, we'll end it there. That's so nice." And then we've ended on this, like everyone's. Yeah.
There you go.
But thank you so much for chatting with us. It was so interesting. Like.